Picture this. You're scrolling through your newsfeed tomorrow morning and suddenly you see a breaking headline. Tech billionaire Elon Musk announces marriage to his pet chimpanzee. Appoints it as Tesla's CEO. Your first instinct? It's fake news. Some deepfake, a parody, maybe an elaborate internet hoax. But what if I told you that nearly 2,000 years ago, the most powerful man on earth didn't just marry his horse, he made it a government official. He threw at extravagant dinner parties where Roman senators were forced to make polite conversation with a stallion, and he built it a marble palace so costly it could have fed an entire Roman city for a full year. Now imagine this. You're standing in the heart of the Roman Empire. It's the year 37 AD. The marble columns of the Senate House stretch toward the azure sky, their surfaces polished like mirrors, glinting in the morning sun. You smell incense burning from nearby temples. Hear the rhythmic clank of Praetorian armor as guards march past. Feel the coolness of the ancient stone beneath your sandaled feet. This isn't just a city. This is the capital of civilization. The place where the fate of 50 million people across 3 continents is decided by men in flowing white togas, men who claim descent from gods. Everything appears dignified, polished, ordered. From the outside, it looks like the peak of human achievement, the height of reason, law, and governance. But what you're about to discover will shatter that illusion because hidden beneath the grandeur is a reality so twisted, so disturbing, it challenges everything you thought you knew about Rome, about power, and about human nature. You might believe Roman emperors were philosopher kings, tactical masterminds who expanded civilization with logic and discipline. But think again. The story I'm about to tell you is not just bizarre, it's so shockingly deranged. It borders on myth, and yet it's all true, documented in multiple ancient sources. If it wasn't backed by real history, you'd never believe it actually happened. And that's what makes this tale truly terrifying. Every detail is historically verified. Suetonius, Cassius Dio, Josephus, these weren't distant scholars, they lived through it. They watched as Rome spiraled into chaos, as its emperor descended into a madness so surreal, it reads like the fever dream of a lunatic. And yes, the horse marriage? That's just the tip of the iceberg. Because what this man did to his family, his advisors, even random citizens who displeased him, it will force you to rethink everything you thought you knew about power, cruelty, and the darkest depths of the human soul. So, stay with me, because this story has more twists than any thriller. The man who married his horse didn't simply wake up one day and decide to go insane. There's a moment, a crack, a shift in his mind that historians documented step by step. And the ending? A conspiracy, an assassination, a chain of revenge, so brutal, so bloody, it puts Hollywood to shame. This is the true story of Caligula, the Roman emperor who didn't just marry his horse, he turned the entire Roman Empire into his personal playground of terror. The 18th of March, 37 AD. If you were walking through the streets of Rome on this day, you would have witnessed something never seen before in human history. The greatest empire the world had ever known was celebrating the rise of its new emperor. And the joy? It was overwhelming. From balconies above, flower petals rained down. Children chased the imperial procession through the streets, their faces glowing with excitement. Women wept openly, not from grief, but from sheer relief and hope. The previous emperor, Tiberius, had become a reclusive tyrant in his final years. He isolated himself on the island of Capri, emerging only to order executions for those he imagined were plotting against him. His death, 3 days earlier, was met with celebrations that lasted through the night. Now, in the streets of Rome, one phrase echoed from every corner. Our boy is finally coming home. Our boy was Gaius Caesar, nicknamed Caligula Little Boots, by the soldiers who had watched him grow up in military camps on the German frontier. He'd worn tiny military sandals as a child, marching alongside his father's legions. The soldiers adored him, the people idolized him, and the Senate, they practically prostrated themselves before him, granting him imperial powers that took previous rulers decades to accumulate. To Rome, Caligula was more than a ruler. He was a symbol, a return to stability, a golden child of the empire. No one could have predicted what he would become. The new emperor's first actions seemed to confirm everyone's highest expectations. He declared generous bonuses for the military, recalled political exiles, and promised to restore the Senate's traditional powers. He organized spectacular games and public feasts. He appeared regularly before the people, speaking eloquently about justice, tradition, and Rome's glorious future. For 7 months, it seemed like the empire had found its perfect ruler. But then came the 3rd of October 7 AD, and everything changed forever. The illness struck without warning. One day, Caligula was reviewing troop deployments with his generals, and the next day, he was writhing in bed, consumed by fever so intense that witnesses described his skin as burning to the touch. The symptoms were absolutely horrific, violent convulsions that required multiple men to hold him down, periods of unconsciousness that lasted for hours, and when he was awake, oh God, he would scream about visions that no one else could see. For days, the empire held its breath. Prayer vigils were organized in every temple from Britain to Egypt. People who had never even met the emperor wept openly in the streets. The Senate authorized massive expenditures for sacrifices to every god in the Roman pantheon. Some citizens, desperate citizens, even offered to sacrifice their own lives if the gods would spare their beloved ruler. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the fever broke. Caligula sat up in bed, smiled at his doctors, and asked for food. The empire exploded. In celebration, festivals were declared across the Mediterranean. The young emperor had conquered death itself, just as he had conquered the hearts of his people. But the man who recovered from that fever wasn't the same man who had fallen ill. Something fundamental, something essential, had been burned away during those days of delirium. The fever had destroyed whatever conscience, empathy, or basic human decency had existed in Caligula's mind, leaving behind something that can only be described as a demon. Wearing the mask of an emperor. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came during a routine Senate meeting in the 3rd of November 7 AD. Picture yourself sitting in the curved marble benches of the Senate House, surrounded by 300 of Rome's most distinguished citizens. The morning light streams through high windows, illuminating the faces of men who have conquered nations and governed provinces. The air carries the familiar sounds of political discourse, the rustle of togas, the scratch of styluses on wax tablets, the measured cadence of formal Latin oratory. Then, the emperor enters, and immediately, you sense that something is different. His walk is too casual, his smile too wide. Instead of taking his place on the ivory curial chair reserved for his use, he begins pacing back and forth in front of the assembly like a caged animal. His eyes dart from face to face with an intensity that makes senators avoid his gaze. "Honored fathers," he begins, using the traditional form of address, but his tone is mocking, almost sarcastic. "I want to discuss a matter of great importance to the empire. A question of loyalty, competence, and service to Rome." The senators lean forward, expecting to hear about military campaigns or provincial administration. Instead, Caligula begins talking about his horse. At first, the subject seems innocent enough. Every Roman knew about Incitatus, the emperor's prized stallion, a magnificent creature with a coat like polished bronze and a spirited temperament that matched his owner's. But as Caligula continues speaking, his voice rising with genuine passion, it becomes clear that he's not discussing the horse as a possession or even as a beloved pet. He's talking about it as if it were a person. "Incitatus has shown more loyalty to Rome than many in this chamber," he declares, his eyes scanning the rows of senators. "He has served with distinction on campaign. He has never plotted against the state. He has never whispered complaints about imperial policy in private dining rooms. The silence that follows is deafening. You can hear your own heartbeat thundering in your ears as the implications of his words sink in. Then comes the announcement that stops time itself. Therefore, I have decided to appoint Incitatus as consul designate for the coming year." The consul was the highest elected office in the Roman Republic, a position traditionally held by the most distinguished statesmen after decades of military service and political achievement. It was a role that carried immense prestige, substantial power, and deep historical significance. And Caligula had just given it to a horse.
The reaction in the Senate is immediate and visceral. Some senators turn pale as marble. Others begin to sweat despite the cool morning air. A few look like they're about to vomit. But no one speaks. No one dares to voice the obvious objection, because they've all seen what happens to people who question the emperor's decisions. But the consulship is just the beginning. Over the following weeks, Caligula begins treating Incitatus not just as a government official, but as a member of the imperial family. He orders the construction of a marble stable that rivals the palaces of kings, complete with ivory mangers, purple blankets, and a staff of 18 slaves whose sole job is to cater to the horse's every whim. The stable itself is a marvel of engineering and excess. The walls are lined with panels of rare marble imported from Egypt and Greece. The floor is covered with mosaics depicting scenes of horses in battle, each tiny stone placed by master craftsmen who normally worked on temples and imperial palaces. The ceiling is painted with frescoes showing Incitatus among the gods, wearing a crown of stars and surrounded by divine light. But the physical luxury is nothing compared to the social elevation. Caligula begins hosting dinner parties where Incitatus is seated at the head table, served golden barley from jeweled bowls and wine from goblets that cost more than most Romans earned in a lifetime. Senators, men who have commanded armies and governed provinces, are forced to make polite conversation with a horse. They have to pretend to listen to its responses, nod thoughtfully at its whinnies, and treat its presence as completely normal. The dinner conversations are surreal beyond description. Caligula will turn to Incitatus and say, "What do you think of the senator's proposal regarding grain distribution?" Then he'll pause, as if listening to a response, before nodding gravely and saying, "Incitatus makes an excellent point. The senator clearly hasn't considered the implications for our Egyptian suppliers." The senators have no choice but to play along. They smile and nod, and pretend that the emperor's one-sided conversation with a horse is the height of political wisdom. Some even begin to anticipate the routine, preparing responses to insights that the horse supposedly shares. The alternative is too terrible to contemplate: exile, execution, or worse. But the dinner parties are just preparation for what comes next. Because Caligula has decided that Incitatus deserves not just political recognition, but social elevation to the highest possible level. He's going to make the horse a member of the imperial family through marriage. Not a symbolic ceremony or a private ritual, but a full imperial wedding with all the pomp and circumstance normally reserved for alliances between royal houses. The announcement sends shockwaves through the empire. Marriage in Roman society isn't just a personal relationship. It's a legal contract that creates family bonds, inheritance rights, and social obligations. By marrying his horse, Caligula is essentially declaring that Roman law means nothing, that the basic structures of civilization are subject to his personal whims. The preparations for the wedding are as elaborate as any state ceremony. The finest craftsmen in the empire are commissioned to create a bridal outfit that will fit a horse. Silk from China and gold thread from Nubia, woven into a garment that shimmers like captured sunlight. A crown is forged specifically for Incitatus, embedded with pearls from the Indian Ocean and emeralds from the mountains of Afghanistan. On the wedding day itself, you would witness something that defies every concept of normalcy and human dignity. The ceremony takes place in the temple of Jupiter, Optimus Maximus, the most sacred religious site in Rome. The guest list reads like a who's who of Roman power. Senators, generals, high priests, foreign ambassadors, provincial governors, anyone who matters in the empire is required to attend. The ceremony itself is conducted with the same solemnity as any imperial wedding. The priests, who have no choice but to perform the ritual or face execution, intone the traditional prayers and blessings. Incitatus is led to the altar by a procession of attendants, adorned in bridal regalia, that transforms the horse into something that looks like a fever dream of luxury and madness. Caligula stands at the altar in his imperial purple, his face glowing with what appears to be genuine joy and love. He speaks his vows with the same passion that other emperors reserve for addressing the Senate or commanding armies. He promises to honor, cherish, and protect his new bride. He places the ring on the horse's hoof with trembling hands, as if he's experiencing the most important moment of his life. But wait. Let me tell you what's really happening here. The psychological impact on the witnesses is absolutely devastating. This isn't just some eccentric behavior. Oh no. This is a deliberate assault on the very foundations of Roman society. Marriage? A sacred institution in Roman culture, the building block of family and civilization itself. By marrying his horse, Caligula is declaring that Roman law, Roman religion, and Roman values are completely and utterly meaningless. And here's the most disturbing part. Everyone has to pretend it's beautiful. Picture this for a moment. Senators, grown men of power and influence, are sending wedding gifts, expensive vases, rare wines, imported delicacies. Poets are composing celebratory verses comparing this union to the marriage of Jupiter and Juno. Provincial governors across the empire are sending congratulatory messages. The entire machinery of Roman government is being forced to acknowledge and celebrate the fact that their emperor has married a horse. But this nightmare isn't just about the marriage ceremony itself. Oh no, it's so much worse than that. This represents the complete breakdown of the barriers between sanity and madness, between civilization and chaos. Caligula has created a world where the impossible becomes mandatory, where the absurd becomes law, where the only rule is whatever twisted desire enters the emperor's mind. The ripple effects spread throughout the empire like a plague of insanity. Having established that he can make people accept the marriage of a man to a horse, Caligula begins testing other horrifying boundaries. He forces senators to run alongside his chariot for miles, watching these elderly men collapse from exhaustion, while he laughs with genuine delight. He makes wealthy citizens sell their property to buy gladiators for his games, then has these gladiators killed in deliberately boring fights just because he can. Then comes something even more terrifying. He begins demanding that people worship him as a living god, something that even the most megalomaniacal emperors had avoided. He has his head placed on statues of Jupiter and other deities. He requires temples to be built in his honor, complete with priests who perform daily sacrifices for his continued health and happiness. The breaking point comes in 41 AD, just 4 years after this reign of terror began. A group of Praetorian guards, led by an officer named Cassius Chaerea, finally reach the end of their endurance. They've watched their emperor humiliate the Senate, terrorize the people, and turn the empire into his personal playground of cruelty. They've seen him force grown men to bow to a horse, demand worship as a god, and treat human life as nothing more than entertainment. The horse marriage has become a symbol of everything that's wrong with the empire. Every single day, they witness Incitatus being treated with more dignity and respect than Roman citizens. Every day, they watch senators and generals defer to an animal while their emperor laughs at this grotesque spectacle. It's a constant, nauseating reminder that they live in a world where human worth means absolutely nothing, and imperial madness means everything. On January 24th, 41 AD, they strike. Caligula is leaving a theatrical performance at the palace when the conspirators surround him in a narrow corridor. According to Josephus, who interviewed survivors, the emperor's last words are a desperate, pathetic plea. "I am still alive." But it's far too late. The man who married his horse, who terrorized an empire, who turned cruelty into performance art, is stabbed to death by his own guards. And what happens to Incitatus? The horse that had been a consul designate, an empress, a symbol of absolute power. Within hours of Caligula's death, the imperial household is dissolved. The marble stable is converted back to normal use. The jeweled bowls and silk blankets are confiscated by the new emperor. The horse that had once dined with senators and been worshipped as a member of the imperial family simply vanishes from history, as if this nightmare had never happened. The new emperor, Claudius, spends months desperately trying to restore normalcy to the empire. He repeals Caligula's most outrageous decrees, restores confiscated property, and tries to rebuild the dignity of Roman institutions. But the psychological damage is permanent. The empire has learned a terrible, haunting lesson about the nature of absolute power and the importance of checks and balances. Looking back from our modern perspective, Caligula's reign seems almost impossible to believe. How could senators and generals and priests all participate in such obvious madness? How could an entire empire allow itself to be terrorized by one man's insanity? But the answer is simpler and more terrifying than we'd like to admit. They were absolutely, utterly afraid. When someone has absolute power, when they can destroy your life, your family, your reputation with a single word, you do whatever they demand. Can you even imagine that fear? Even if it means bowing to a horse, even if it means pretending that the impossible is normal, even if it means surrendering your dignity, your principles, and your basic humanity. It's absolutely heartbreaking. The story of Caligula and Incitatus isn't just ancient history. Oh no, it's a terrifying warning that echoes across the centuries. It shows us what happens when power becomes concentrated in the hands of someone who views other people as toys, to be manipulated and broken. And let me tell you, it reminds us that civilization is more fragile than we think, that the institutions we take for granted can be destroyed by a single person who refuses to acknowledge any limits on their authority. It's genuinely disturbing. The emperor who married his horse reminds us that we must always be vigilant against those who would treat our dignity, our laws, and our humanity as meaningless obstacles to their personal power. The next time you see a leader who demands absolute loyalty, who treats criticism as treason, who surrounds themselves with family members and yes-men, remember Incitatus. Remember the horse that became an empress. Remember the empire that was forced to celebrate its own humiliation. God, it gives me chills just thinking about it. If this story has shocked you, as much as it shocked me when I first discovered it in the ancient sources, and wow, I was absolutely floored, make sure you hit that subscribe button for more incredible historical revelations. Next week, I'm diving into the story of Empress Messalina, who turned the Roman imperial palace into a brothel and competed with professional prostitutes, and what happened when her husband finally found out. Trust me, it makes Caligula look almost normal by comparison. Almost! I can't wait to share that madness with you. What did you think of this absolutely insane story? I'm dying to know. Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you want more shocking historical content that definitely didn't make it into your textbooks. Because honestly, the real history is always more jaw-dropping than fiction could ever be.